Good afternoon. We begin with developing news in the case of human remains that were found last week in southwestern Colorado.
Today, police said the case is now a murder investigation. They do have a suspect. A massive manhunt is underway. 9 News crime and justice reporter Matt Jablow now with the very latest.
His legal name is Andre Jordan Barrows, but law enforcement officers said today that most people just call him Psycho.
He is commonly called Psycho around these areas.
And while no explanation was given for his nickname, we do know that 26-year-old Barrows has a lengthy arrest record for various violent crimes over the past few years. We also know that he's now on the run, wanted in connection with the deaths of 3 unidentified people whose remains were found last week on 2 different properties, not far from where Barrows is from, in the remote San Luis Valley, about 4 hours southwest of Denver.
Currently have a warrant, an active warrant for homicide for Mr. Barrows.
At today's virtual press conference announcing the manhunt for Barrows, police would not say why or at what point he became the focus of their investigation. They did reveal that the original search warrants at the properties had to do with stolen equipment and stolen vehicles.
Obviously, we don't see cases like this very often.
They also added more than once that Barrows should be considered armed and dangerous, and they're urging anyone who sees him or knows of his whereabouts to call 911 immediately.
Our main goal is to get him off the street. He is a danger to the public right now.
Matt Jablow, 9 News.
Police also wanted to point out today that at this point there does not seem to be any connection between those remains found last week and the disappearance of Suzanne Morphew, the mother of 2 who was reported missing 6 months ago in Chaffee County.
The U.S. surpassed a grim milestone today, more than 250,000 deaths due to COVID-19. That's more than 250,000 people who have died since the pandemic began. And nationwide, cases are still rising every day. In the last week, Colorado has seen an average of more than 4,000 cases of COVID-19 every day. That's more than double what we saw just 2 weeks ago. The Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment says Colorado hospitals are feeling the stress.
And CDPHE shared an update this morning on both the state of the hospitals and Colorado's exposure notification app. Here with more is 9 News reporter Noel Brennan.
Our healthcare system is beginning to feel the stress.
Pressure mounts in Colorado hospitals with a new peak in COVID patients each day.
Today we're at over more than 1,400.
On Wednesday, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment asked Colorado to help relieve pressure.
We need everybody to add their phone to the fight.
17% of Coloradans have downloaded the Colorado Exposure Notifications app.
Studies show that if just 15% of any community can enable exposure notifications, infections can be reduced by up to 8% and fatalities by up to 6%.
As the app rolled out, CDPHE admits it had trouble keeping up.
As cases increased, we couldn't get those codes out fast enough.
People who test positive for COVID-19 need to enter a code in the app so it can notify others. The state hoped to rely on local health departments to send codes, but they could only handle 20 to 40 a day.
We've made huge process improvements.
Now anyone who tests positive gets a text with a code.
We're now issuing between 3,000 and 5,000 each day.
One tool to help relieve mounting pressure.
People should be getting notifications much more quickly.
Noel Brennan, 9 News.
CDPHE says it sends codes to anyone who tests positive, even if they have not enabled the app. About 25,000 codes have been sent out, and about 3,400 people have entered those into the app. For more information on how to enable or download the app, you can go to 9news.com. And now more than half a dozen members of Congress have tested positive for COVID-19, and that includes Colorado Republican Doug Lamborn. His office said today he is experiencing mild symptoms and is isolating at his home in Colorado Springs. Colorado Democrat Ed Perlmutter announced late last night that he too tested positive for COVID-19, but he says he's asymptomatic. He is isolating as well in Washington, D.C. Several other lawmakers at the U.S. Capitol have tested positive just over the last few days, including the longest-serving Republican Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley.
And just in the last half hour, we have learned of yet another DPS leader leaving the district. The district's Deputy Superintendent of Operations, Mark Ferrandino, is leaving DPS for a state job. The governor's office announced this late this afternoon. Ferrandino will become the director of the State Department of Revenue. This comes less than a week after Superintendent Susana Cordova announced her departure for a job in Dallas, Texas. At the same time, DPS is trying to figure out how to teach students during the pandemic. Ferrandino, you may remember, was a Speaker of the House in the Colorado legislature. An update on all of this coming up at 4:30.
That negative test today does not mean you're going to be negative tomorrow or the next day, and certainly not by Thanksgiving.
And that is the nation's testing czar, Admiral Brett Giroir, on MSNBC today, asking people to avoid gathering for Thanksgiving. That's a problem for the country's college students who are living away from home. As 9 News reporter Nelson Garcia shows us, the request to not travel may contribute to an increasing problem at universities around our state.
Usually, there's lots of things happening on a college campus. But this year, the throngs of students, the intermingling of minds, are replaced by an emptiness. Outside and inside, according to CU Denver Assistant Vice Chancellor Kristen Kushmeider.
I would say it's my job to make sure that we have the resources available to support our students on their journey to mental well-being.
She says last year she did a health assessment of students to see what's happening on her college campus, and it showed that 61% of students felt lonely or isolated. This year with the pandemic, Kushmeider says one national survey shows that number increasing to 80%.
What concerns me the most about our students experiencing loneliness and isolation is that that could potentially lead to other mental health issues that are more significant.
One thing that's not supposed to be happening on campus, Thanksgiving. But students across the country are being asked not to travel home due to the increasing spread of COVID-19.
I think that's something that's going to affect all of us, not having the ability to be with our families over the holidays, particularly for students who are staying on campus.
CU Denver is making sure programs continue over break to help students stay connected. And Kushmeider says the university has partnered with a new app called Nod to challenge students to find ways to be social.
That app was specifically designed to address loneliness and isolation for young adults and college students.
Issues that are opposite of what's usually happening on a college campus.
The connection is so important.
In Denver, Nelson Garcia, 9 News.
And Kushmeider says that CU Denver has moved counseling services onto a virtual platform to reach more students who may need some extra help.